June 30th, 1941, just outside the village of Reappeared, Lithuania. The morning fog clung to the wheat fields like a damp curtain as Unteroffizier Karl Metzger of the 6th Panzer Division wiped a smear of soot off the periscope of his Panzer III. The engine rumbled under his boots, the vibration steady and familiar, almost comforting. Ahead of him, the battalion's advance columns pushed east in long steel lines, confident, unstoppable, certain of victory after weeks of rapid gains. Then he saw it, a dark, angular silhouette rising between the burning farmhouses, a tank, broad-shouldered sloping armor, turret like a clenched fist. A T-34, one they had already fought that very morning. Metzger's crew had seen the shell hit. They had watched it burst in a shower of sparks. They'd marked the kill, moved on, pushed deeper. The Soviets weren't supposed to have anything that could survive a direct hit from 50mm gunfire, but there it was again. The wounded giant's turret slowly turned, the barrel sniffing the air like a hunting animal. Black scorch marks streaked its armor. One fender was half ripped away, yet the thing was alive, very much alive. "Impossible," Metzger whispered. Inside the Panzer III, loader Emil Hartmann stared through the gunner's scope. "But we hit that one. I saw it stop. I swear it was done." Their commander, Lieutenant Otto Rademacher, raised binoculars, jaw tightening. "No, they pulled it back. They repaired it. Within hours." Behind the T-34, the fog shifted, and Metzger saw the shadows. Dozens of Soviet mechanics, drivers, and armored recovery crews. They moved like ants, dragging cables, hauling tools, shouting orders, under fire, under chaos, under advancing German pressure. And still they worked. Soviet repair battalions, Metzger realized, operating practically on the front line. A thunderous blast answered his thoughts. The T-34 fired, its cannon erupting flames. The shell smashed into the earth just meters from the Panzer III. "Back! Back!" Rademacher roared. The German tank lurched into reverse as the resurrected Soviet machine lumbered forward, defiant and unbroken. Metzger felt his heartbeat punching against his ribs. Across the line, other German crews were shouting the same thing. "Didn't we kill that one earlier? How is it back? Or what are they doing over there?" No briefing, no intelligence report, no pre-war study had warned them of this. A tank that came back from the dead, a tank supported by a repair system designed to keep it fighting again and again, no matter how many times the Germans thought they had stopped it. But this T-34 was just the beginning. The Eastern Front was about to introduce the Wehrmacht to a machinery of battlefield recovery so relentless, so close to the fighting, that German crews would start doubting their own victories. They would radio in confirmed kills, only to face the same tank the next day, sometimes even the same afternoon. The myth of German invincibility was starting to crack, and it cracked the moment the Soviets showed they could resurrect armor faster than German guns could destroy it. Before we continue, if stories like these reach you, it's because you value history. A quick like or comment helps keep these forgotten moments alive and ensures more people discover them. Thanks for supporting channels that preserve the past. Rademacher steadied himself, eyes fixed on the advancing T-34. "Metzger," he said quietly, "tell the men, we're facing something new." The Panzer III's engine roared as Metzger gripped the controls. The battlefield around him dissolved into fire and smoke as the impossible Soviet tank pressed forward. And as the German line braced itself, a single thought gripped every crewman. If the Soviets can bring a burning wreck back into battle in hours, what else are they capable of? The resurrected T-34 kept coming, grinding over charred fence posts and the remains of an orchard, as Metzger's Panzer III fell back through the drifting smoke. The German formation tried to reorient, but the shockwave of disbelief rippled across the radios. Half-finished sentences, panicked call signs, shouted orders stepping on each other. Meanwhile, just behind the ridge where the T-34 had reappeared, an entire hidden world was in motion. Sergeant Dmitry Yegorov, commander of the 37th Independent Armored Recovery Platoon, wiped the sweat and grime from his brow as he signaled two drivers to bring up a battered STZ-5 tractor. Even as shells whistled overhead, Yegorov's men worked with a calm born of grim routine. Their job wasn't glorious, but it was essential. Go to the wrecks, pull them back, and get them fighting again before the Germans could reorganize. It was a system the Red Army had designed in desperation, one that kept the Soviet front lines supplied with tanks, even as the factories far to the east struggled to replace losses. "Hook it there," Yegorov barked, pointing at the burned-out hull of another T-34 lying half-submerged in a crater. Two crewmen sprinted forward with heavy chains, snapping them around the towing points as artillery thumped somewhere behind the forest. A young mechanic yelled over the din, "Comrade Sergeant, that one we recovered earlier, it's returning to the field right now." Yegorov gave a rare, brief smile. "Then the system works. Good." The Soviets had placed their armored repair battalions dangerously close to the front, sometimes only a few hundred meters behind the infantry. What they lacked in resources, they made up for in sheer audacity. Field workshops were little more than tarps, scrap piles, and welding torches, but the crews were relentless. Engines were swapped in the mud. Track links hammered back into shape with sledgehammers, fuel lines patched with whatever cloth or metal they could find. A T-34 that could still move, or could be made to move, was not allowed to die. Not today. Nearby, Captain Sergei Chernov, commander of the battalion, surveyed the chaos inside the makeshift workshop. Damaged tanks stood in rows, some missing turrets, some missing tracks, some still smoking. His crews shouted instructions to each other, the clang of tools ringing through the trees. "How many can you return by sundown?" he demanded of a chief mechanic. The mechanic didn't look up from the engine block he was wrestling with. "3 for sure, maybe 5. Depends on the Germans." Chernov grunted approval. "They will not expect it." "Good." A courier approached breathlessly. "Captain, the division reports enemy armor advancing again. They say the same German company that knocked out our tanks this morning is pushing toward the village." "Then they are about to learn something," Chernov said, sliding a wrench into his belt. "The Red Army does not throw tanks away." The first repaired T-34 roared back to life, belching black smoke as its engine turned over. Its driver, a young man whose eyebrows were still singed from the morning's hit, grinned from ear to ear. Chernov slapped the tank's hull. "Go! Show them we still stand." Moments later it crested the ridge, right back into Metzger's field of vision. Across the battlefield inside the Panzer III, Metzger felt his throat tighten as another newly revived T-34 emerged beside the first. "That one too," Hartmann muttered. "They can't possibly be this fast." Rademacher's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "They have a machine behind the front, a machine we have never faced before." The German crew watched in stunned silence as 2 Soviet tanks, both bearing fresh scars from the morning's fight, formed up and advanced side by side, engines growling like resurrected beasts. This wasn't chaos, this wasn't chance. This was a system, a Soviet system built on endurance, speed, and a willingness to risk everything to keep their armor alive. And for the first time in the campaign, Metzger felt something cold slip down his spine. If Germany's greatest advantage was supposed to be efficiency and organization, then how were the Soviets moving faster? As the twin T-34s advanced across the smoke-wreathed fields, Metzger felt the tracks of his Panzer III shudder beneath him. The enemy tanks weren't just returning, they were coming with purpose. In a formation, their movements crisp and coordinated. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't luck. This was intent. Rademacher's voice crackled over the intercom. "Hold position behind the hedgerow. Gunner, stand by. We need a clean angle." But even as he issued the order, the lieutenant's tone betrayed the truth. The German line was no longer in control of this moment. To the left, another Panzer III opened fire. Its shell pinged harmlessly off the sloped armor of the first T-34. The Soviet tank didn't flinch. It kept rolling, turrets swinging like the patient gaze of a predator. Inside the German ranks, radios filled with tension. "Command, this is Alpha 2. Be advised, enemy armor we disabled earlier has returned to the battlefield." "That's impossible. Confirm your identification." "I'm staring right at the scorch marks. This is the same beast." "Stand by. Sending message up the chain." Metzger exhaled sharply as he watched the exchange unfold. The wheeled command vehicle behind them, and Sergeyev's M-223, was already scrambling to relay the information to Battalion HQ. He imagined the looks on the staff officers' faces when they heard it. Enemy tanks previously destroyed are now re-engaging, a sentence that shouldn't be real, a sentence that hinted at something far larger. Meanwhile, 4 kilometers east, at the 6th Panzer Division's forward command post, a cluster of officers studied shifting positions on a map marked in thick pencil. Reconnaissance drones didn't exist. Every update came from breathless radio bursts or motorcycle couriers arriving coated in dust. Major Ernst Vogel, operations officer, was in the middle of adjusting the division's flanking maneuver when the radio operator lifted a finger. "Sir, message from the 3rd Company. They report unusual activity." Vogel didn't look up. "Everything is unusual here. What now?" "Recovered Soviet tanks returning to frontline combat within hours." Vogel's pencil froze. "Read that again." The operator cleared his throat, slower this time. "Recovered Soviet tanks, battle-damaged, are reappearing on the line." Across the tent, a logistics officer snorted. "Nonsense, they're misidentifying." But Vogel didn't dismiss it. He'd heard whispers. He'd seen the morning assessment logs. He'd even watched as two T-34s captured earlier had been dragged off by Soviet crews in the dead of night during a counterattack. Tanks the Germans had only partially disabled. He looked up at the intelligence officer, Hauptmann Kraus. "You said yesterday the Soviets had mobile workshops near the front?" Kraus nodded. "Yes, reports from prisoner interrogations, highly organized, dangerously close to the fighting." "And we didn't think much of it?" Vogel muttered. "No, sir. We assumed they couldn't keep up with the losses." But now the picture was changing. The Germans had planned their offensives around the assumption that Soviet armor could not sustain prolonged engagements. Every Panzer kill counted. Every wrecked enemy tank reduced the next day's resistance. But what if the kills weren't sticking? What if the Soviets had crafted a system to negate the Germans' greatest tactical success? Vogel straightened, jaw hardening. "Send word to Division Command. We need confirmation. And tell the frontline units, expect repeated contact with previously damaged vehicles." The staff exchanged uneasy glances. Repeated contact. With the same tanks. It sounded like madness. And yet the battlefield was telling them otherwise. Back at the hedgerow, the two T-34s broke into a run, if such a heavy machine could run, accelerating over the last stretch of open field. Metzger spotted fresh welding lines on the side of one hull. Another bore replacement track links that didn't match. These tanks had been repaired hastily, brutally, effectively. "Gunner, target the lead tank!" Rademacher shouted. Hartmann fired. The shells sparked, ricocheted, spun into the sky. The T-34 did not stop. A surge of dread ran through the German crew. "They're not giving us time," Metzger said through clenched teeth. Rademacher cursed. "They don't need time. They have them ready." A third Soviet tank rose over the ridge, then a fourth, not fresh arrivals, not reinforcements. Every one of them showed patches, dents, scorches, the unmistakable scars of tanks that had already been to hell and back today. Metzger realized the truth with a hollow feeling in his stomach. The Soviets weren't just using tanks. They were recycling them, almost in real time. And as the T-34s surged forward in a renewed assault, the false narrative of German invincibility began to crumble. Because if the Red Army could bring back armor faster than the Germans could destroy it, then this front was not going to be won quick, or easily, or maybe at all. The Eastern Front was becoming a war of endurance, and the Soviets had just shown how far they were willing to go. The ground shook beneath Metzger's boots as the Panzer III reversed down the shallow slope, its treads grinding through churned mud and shattered wheat. He could feel the panic building in the engine's strained growl as much as in the crew's clipped, anxious breaths. The Soviet tanks were closing in. Too fast, too many, too familiar. "Driver, pivot left, get us behind the ridge," Rademacher barked. Metzger complied, the tank lurching sharply. A spray of dirt kicked up beside them as a T-34 shell landed close, far too close. The concussion rattled loose bolts, and Hartmann swore as one of the spare shells thumped loudly inside its rack. "Sir, they're pushing us harder than before," Hartmann said, fighting to stabilize his aim. The words hit Metzger harder than the explosion. These weren't fresh, eager Soviet crews charging recklessly. These were men who had already fought today, who had been knocked out, rescued, repaired, armed again, and sent straight back into battle. Their aggression wasn't recklessness, it was momentum the Germans hadn't expected. Ahead, the ridgeline erupted as more T-34s emerged, their silhouettes cutting through the smoke like phantoms. One bore a newly welded patch where a shell had punched into the turret hours earlier. Another had mismatched road wheels, scavenged, Metzger guessed, from 2 or 3 different wrecks. Rademacher muttered under his breath. "They're stitching these monsters back together with whatever they can find." "And it's working," Metzger whispered. Inside one of the charging T-34s, Lieutenant Alexei Morozov braced himself as the tank bounced over a shallow embankment. His bruised ribs flared with pain. Hours earlier, when the Panzer III had hit his machine, he'd been thrown against the turret ring and nearly knocked unconscious. But the field workshop had dragged their battered T-34 off the line before the Germans could press forward. Morozov remembered lying on the ground, coughing, while mechanics shouted around him, "Get this one up first! Fuel it, quickly! Track pins are bent. Swap them. Engines hot but running. Good enough." His crew had barely had time to swallow water before being ordered back in. "Germans regrouping at the hedgerow," the battalion runner had yelled. "You're to counterattack immediately." And so here they were. Morozov grinned, despite the pain. "For motherland," he murmured, pulling himself upright. His gunner, Victor, spat blood from where he'd bitten his cheek earlier. "Comrade Lieutenant, range 300 meters, enemy pulling back." Victor steadied the sight. "Not fast enough," he fired. The cannon thundered. The shell streaked toward a retreating Panzer III, one not Metzger's, and slammed into its left track. The German tank skidded sideways, sparks flying as metal tore against stone. Morozov's driver whooped, "One more down!" "Not destroyed," Morozov corrected, "but they won't be back in the fight today." He felt a flicker of pride. Pride in the repair crews who had resurrected them, in the grit of his own men, in the growing realization that the Soviets were no longer merely surviving the German advance, they were adapting to it, faster than the Germans believed possible. Back to Metzger's Panzer III, the German tank finally reached the lee of the ridge, tucking itself briefly into safety. But even here, the ground trembled with the approach of the T-34s. The sounds of their engines were unmistakable, throaty, deep, almost animalistic. Rademacher looked through the commander's cupola, jaw tight. "They're forming a wedge. Soviet textbook counterattack," Hartmann spat. "With tanks we already killed once today." "And that," Rademacher said, "is what makes this dangerous." Behind them, the remainder of the German company attempted to reform: 1 Panzer IV, 4 Panzer IIIs, and 2 armored cars. Their original strength had been nearly double. The morning's offensive had been costly. "Radio Battalion HQ," Rademacher ordered. "Tell them the Soviet armor is exploiting a gap on our right." Metzger switched channels. "Command, this is Iron 3-1. Enemy armor advancing. Multiple T-34s, previously damaged. Repeating, previously damaged. Now re-engaging. We're falling back to secondary position." Static, then a faint reply. "Copy, 3-1. Reinforcements en route. Hold as long as able." Reinforcements. But how long would they take? How long would the Panzer III survive against the reborn Soviet tanks pressing the attack? Rademacher seemed to read Metzger's thoughts. "We're not dead yet. The Panzer III still has teeth." Metzger nodded, but the doubt gnawed at him. Teeth were one thing, armor was another, and after today, Metzger no longer trusted that a kill was truly a kill. He braced himself as the turret rotated toward the crest of the ridge. "Here they come," Hartmann whispered. A T-34 rose into view, its hull battered, its paint scorched, its spirit very much alive. The crest of the ridge shuddered as the first T-34 barreled over it, sunlight glinting off the jagged welding scars along its glacis. The machine looked less like a tank and more like something hammered back into existence by sheer will. Behind it, 2 more emerged, their engines roaring in a staggered harmony that echoed across the valley. Inside the Panzer III, Metzger felt every vibration through the soles of his boots. The tension was thick enough to taste: metal, oil, fear. "Steady, steady," Rademacher murmured, leaning against the cupola's rim. Hartmann lined up his shot, breath held. "Range 200 meters. Firing." The cannon boomed, the shell streaked forward, struck the T-34's upper hull, and bounced off in a shower of sparks. "Scheisse," Hartmann hissed. The Soviet tank didn't even slow. It simply turned its turret, deliberately, almost insultingly slow, as though mocking the German crew's efforts. "Driver, reverse 10 meters," Rademacher snapped. Metzger yanked the controls. The Panzer III groaned backward just as the T-34 fired, its shell ripping through the ridge, throwing earth and rock into the air. Shards clattered across the Panzer's armor like hail. "All tanks, fall back to the tree line," Rademacher shouted into the radio. "Do not let them close the distance." But the Soviet counterattack was already unraveling the German line. To their left, a Panzer III took a direct hit to the turret ring. Its hatch blew open like a kicked door, smoke pouring out. The tank swerved, treads digging into soft soil before collapsing onto its side. To the right, a Panzer IV tried to reposition its longer 75mm gun, finally promising a chance at punching through the T-34's armor. But before it could fire, another resurrected Soviet machine crested the ridge and hammered it with a crushing blow to the frontal plate. The German tank shuddered, halted, and exhaled black smoke. German infantry scattered, diving into ditches, clutching rifles useless against the onslaught of steel. Rademacher watched through the periscope, voice hollow. "This shouldn't be possible. They lost half these tanks this morning. And now they're gaining ground with them," Metzger replied. Inside the Soviet assault, Lieutenant Morozov's tank leapt forward as the driver pushed the engine to its limit. The T-34 wasn't in good shape. Its left track was rattling, and the turret traverse moaned like a wounded beast. But in this moment, its flaws didn't matter. "Target the Panzer with long gun! Right side!" Morozov shouted. Victor swiveled the sight. "Tracking! Firing!" The gun barked. Smoke filled the turret. Morozov blinked through the haze as the Panzer IV erupted into smoke. "Good! Keep pushing!" he yelled. His crew wasn't thinking about how exhausted they were. They weren't thinking about the burns, the bruises, the near death they'd brushed just hours ago. They were thinking only of momentum, an iron wave rolling back the German tide. They had been repaired, refueled, and thrown back into battle with a singular purpose: break the German advance, no matter the cost, no matter how many times their tanks needed to be dragged back and stitched together again. Back to the German line, the retreat was no longer organized, it was desperate. Metzger spun the Panzer III between two burning farmhouses as the Soviet tanks bulldozed forward. The hull reverberated with every nearby explosion, and the interior filled with the acrid tang of cordite and fear. "Driver, left, left!" Rademacher barked. "Trying!" Metzger shouted. "Ground's too soft!" They skidded, nearly tipping, before the tank caught traction again. Hartmann loaded another shell. "Sir, if this keeps up, there won't be a line left to retreat to." Rademacher didn't answer. Ahead, the battalion's remaining armored cars attempted to lay suppressing fire. Their 20mm cannons rattled like sewing machines against the advancing Soviet metal. The rounds sparked harmlessly off the T-34's armor. "This is madness," Hartmann muttered. "We hit these same tanks hours ago." And that was when Metzger understood the real fear crawling through the German ranks. It wasn't just that the Soviets had tanks that could survive hits. It was the dawning realization that the Germans' hard-won victories were being erased in real time. Every enemy tank they knocked out was no longer a statistic. It was a temporary inconvenience, a delay, a pause before resurrection. The battlefield was a living engine, and the Soviets were turning its gears faster than the Germans could break them. Rademacher finally spoke, voice low, steady, almost reverent. "They've built a repair system right on the battlefield. That's how they're doing it." Metzger finished the thought in a whisper. "And if we can't kill their tanks faster than they can repair them, then we can't win here," Rademacher said. Another explosion rocked the Panzer III, and Metzger gritted his teeth as he forced the tank deeper into the tree line. Behind them, the T-34s pushed forward with unstoppable momentum, ghosts of the morning battle, reborn and relentless. The Germans had entered the East, believing in a war of speed. They were now discovering it was a war of endurance, and the Soviets were proving they could endure anything. The forests swallowed the Panzer III in a cloud of broken branches and torn leaves as Metzger steered it between the pines. The engine strained, growling like a cornered animal. Each vibration felt like the heartbeat of something barely holding together. Inside the turret, Rademacher scanned the rear through the narrow slit of his periscope. Black columns of smoke spiraled upward from the fields they'd fled, German steel burning, German lines collapsing, German confidence shattering. Hartmann slammed another round into the breach. "We can't keep running. They'll pin us against the river." "Better pinned than dead," Rademacher replied. But Metzger had already heard the other sound, the deep rolling thunder of advancing T-34s. Their engines reverberated through the forest floor, a kind of mechanical heartbeat that synced with Metzger's own pulse. Not long now, not long before the ghosts of this morning's battle arrived to finish what they'd started. At the German battalion command post, Major Vogel stood stiffly in the open air as the smell of smoke crept through the forest canopy. The field telephone in his hand crackled with a dozen frantic voices. "Enemy armor breaking through the right flank. T-34s we neutralized are back, sir. I repeat, they're back. Need anti-tank support immediately." They're not stopping, Jesus Christ, they're not stop." Vogel slammed the receiver down. Across the hastily arranged map table, Hauptmann Kraus adjusted his glasses. "Sir, we must face the possibility that the Soviet armored doctrine is not collapsing as expected." "Not collapsing?" Vogel snapped. "Their tanks are rising from the dead within hours." Kraus hesitated. "Our assumptions were flawed. Soviet repair capabilities were underestimated." Vogel stared at him. "Underestimated? We planned blitzkrieg operations based on destroying their armor faster than they could replace it. But if they can restore tanks today that we killed today..." He let the thought trail off. It was unthinkable. A war built on speed could drown in a sea of machines that refused to stay dead. A courier arrived breathlessly. "Sir, the forward companies are falling back. They say more Soviet armor is pushing west." "How many?" "Unknown, sir. But they report visible patchwork on the hulls. These are the same tanks from this morning." Vogel's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Then the morning's victory was an illusion. He looked east, toward the invisible front line, toward the thunder of resurrected engines rolling ever closer. The illusion was shattering. Back at the forest edge, Metzger slowed the Panzer III to a crawl. Two other German tanks had taken up positions behind fallen logs, forming a shaky defensive scatter. The crews were silent, shaken. Metzger recognized the expression in their eyes when commanders moved between vehicles. The look of men who had just learned a terrible truth. Rademacher lifted himself halfway out of the hatch. All tanks, hold fire until you have a clear flank shot, and pray they haven't repaired everything on those monsters." As he settled back, he exhaled slowly. Metzger stole a quick glance at him. The lieutenant's face was pale, jaw set, eyes narrowed. "This wasn't supposed to happen, sir," Metzger said quietly. Rademacher didn't look at him. He didn't need to. "No," he muttered. "It wasn't." But war had never cared about what was supposed to happen. Branches cracked, a tree shook, then a dark hull pushed through the undergrowth, its armor pitted, covered with soot, patched with a scrap iron plate that looked like it had been welded on with shaking hands. A previously destroyed T-34. "Back again, Hartmann whispered. "They've turned the battlefield into a repair shop." "And we're fighting the infantry," Metzger replied. The T-34's turret rotated, slow and deliberate. The cannon's muzzle slid across the tree line, hunting for heat, movement, life. Metzger's breath stopped. "Hold!" Rademacher whispered. The Soviet tank paused, listened, waited. Then another emerged behind it, then another. A whole company, rebuilt from the wrecks the Germans thought were victories. Rademacher gripped the edge of his hatch. "We're watching history change," he whispered, and he wasn't wrong. At the edge of the forest, the moment of realization came all at once. One of the T-34s shifted its angle, revealing the crude welding seams along its side, repairs done under fire, in mud, by mechanics who refused to let the machine die. Metzger felt something tighten in his chest. These tanks weren't symbols of Soviet strength. They were symbols of Soviet endurance, a relentless will to fight, to rise, to return. A kind of warfare the Germans hadn't planned for, hadn't trained for, hadn't imagined. The first T-34 pushed deeper into the trees, snapping a young pine clean in half. Bark and needles scattered across the Panzer III's hull as Metzger held his breath and eased back on the throttle. The Soviet tank's turret swept left, then right, the barrel gliding across the shadows like an accusing finger. Hartmann gripped the shell in his lap so tightly his knuckles went white. "One shot at the flank," he whispered. "That's all we'll get." Rademacher didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the rotating barrel. The forest felt claustrophobic, too tight, too alive with the groaning engines of machines that weren't supposed to exist twice in one day. The T-34 chuffed forward another meter, treads grinding over fallen branches. Its side armor was exposed now, a patchwork of Soviet steel, factory plates and field-welded scraps. A weak point, yes, but also a reminder of why it was here at all. A machine resurrected by hands that refused surrender. "Gunner," Rademacher breathed. "I have it," Hartmann whispered. The Panzer III exhaled through its exhaust. The T-34 exhaled steam from its engine vents. For a heartbeat, the forest held both machines suspended in a tense, unnatural stillness. Then the T-34's turret clicked. "Fire!" Rademacher roared. Hartmann triggered the shot. The cannon spat flame. The shell slammed into the T-34's flank, right at the welded seam. For a moment, the tank only shuddered. Then came the explosion, a burst of fire, a groan of twisting metal. And finally the collapse, the resurrected beast tilting sideways, hissing like something dragged reluctantly back into the earth. Metzger gasped, realizing only then how long he'd been holding his breath. "Reload!" Rademacher snapped, but before Hartmann could reach the next shell, a second T-34, one Metzger recognized by its mismatched road wheels, lurched into view, cannon already zeroed in. "Down!" Rademacher barked, diving into the turret. The Soviet round struck the front plate like a hammer from the gods. The Panzer III shook violently, glass cracked, dust filled the compartments, but the armor held barely. "We're alive!" Hartmann shouted over the ringing in their ears. Metzger wrestled the tank backward, trying to slip deeper into the gully. The engine screamed, trees whipped past. The world became a smear of green, brown, and smoke. Behind them, the resurrected Soviet tide pressed on. Across the forest, the truth finally revealed itself. German vehicles burned in the distance, infantry fell back in disarray, and the unnatural rhythm of Soviet engines, machines that had already died once today, echoed through the timber like a heartbeat that refused to stop. The realization seeped through every surviving German crewman. This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't even Soviet resilience. It was Soviet design, a battlefield repair system so aggressive, so close, so fearless that German tactical victories dissolved almost as quickly as they were earned. Rademacher watched flames flicker through the trees and finally spoke the words that had been tightening around the day like a vice. "We aren't just fighting tanks," he murmured. "We're fighting a nation's refusal to die." Metzger swallowed hard. The forest fell quiet, except for the groans of distant machinery, engines reborn, rolling forward again. The Germans had crossed into the east, expecting a quick war decided by speed. But what they encountered here, on this torn patch of earth beneath these pines, was something far more dangerous: endurance, a kind of endurance that welded broken steel back together and hurled it back into battle before the smoke of its last defeat had even cleared. The war was changing, and the men who survived this day knew it. If this story reached you, don't let the men in it, Metzger, Rademacher, Morozov, and the countless unnamed mechanics who risked death under falling shells, fade into a footnote. A like or share isn't about the algorithm. It's a way of saying their struggle, fear, and endurance still matter. What do you think this moment reveals about the real deciding factor in war? Brilliant machine, or the human beings willing to drag those machines back into the fight again and again? In the end, the Eastern Front proved one truth. Victory belongs not to the side that strikes hardest, but to the one that refuses to stay broken.